What would it take to eliminate poverty in Canada by the year 2030? This is the 2030 Project. It's a podcast that explores why poverty persists and what we can do about it in this country. We endeavor to uncover what's been successful with Canada's poverty reduction strategy, but then what needs to come next? The 2030 Project tackles some of the biggest and the most pressing social issues facing this country today. I'm Dave Trafford, and thanks for joining us. In this episode, we reassemble our roundtable of Avengers. Talia Bronstein is the VP of Research and Advocacy at Daily Bread Food Bank. Gareema Talwar Kapoor is the Director of Policy and Research with Maytree. Jasmine Ramze Rezaee is the Director of Advocacy and Communications at the YWCA in Toronto. And I want to harken back to something we all heard in the last episode when we talked to Kate. Kate lives in Toronto. She relies on food banks and social assistance to make ends meet. And I asked her, based on her lived experience, does she hold any hope that poverty could be significantly reduced?
I don't believe so. Because I go for my walks in the morning and I see the poverty in the street, the people sleeping on the street. Yeah. The homelessness is an issue for Toronto.
So no matter what a politician might say or a government program might offer, you don't think that we are going to get out from underneath this?
Poverty existed from the beginning of time, and it will continue to exist. I was given a verse in the book of Revelations. It spoke to my spirit. It says, I know your afflictions, I know your poverty, yet you are rich. And that's my story.
So you don't consider yourself living in poverty?
I live below the poverty line, but I live abundantly. I have everything I need. He is my provider, and that's a testimony. I'm talking from my heart. I'm grateful that I'm in a benefit program, but it's not enough to live on.
Gareema, Kate is all at once staggeringly inspiring and hopeless. She lives in abundance, but she hasn't got enough to live on.
What we're seeing, and this woman that you were talking to, exemplifies our collective failure for people to be able to realize their human right to an adequate standard of living. And how you define that, whether that's on an income basis, plus thinking about different types of services and benefits that somebody might need. Let's just be clear. Nobody lives in poverty out of choice. There are extenuating circumstances that push people into poverty. And we do not have a social safety net that helps to catch them and helps them to be able to stabilize their lives so that they can live a life that enables them to thrive. Instead, we've got a social safety net with a ton of holes, but also one that's very knotted. You've got a set of rules from provincial government programs. You've got a set of rules from municipal government programs. And while governments and ministries and divisions may operate in silos, people don't. And we forget about that. I talk to policy thinkers and makers all the time, and it'll be like, oh, that's a housing policy issue. That's a mental health and addiction services issue. No, it's a human issue. And until we start to think about that and put people at the center of policy making, I'm afraid that we're going to continue to fail people like the person that you were talking about.
So, Talia, one of the things that struck me as I spoke to some of these folks in their lived experience, and all of them reflected the same level of resilience and unexplainable optimism that Kate expressed. But to your point, I think in the last episode that we were talking about, I just pick up on something there, and it was almost as if the system that they faced, to sort of simplify what Gareema had said, is where they were in a position where they had to prove that they were living in poverty. They were worthy of living in poverty. Now, that might be overstating it, but I think it kind of underlines the challenges that they often face with trying to navigate the various jurisdictions, the various requirements, to the point where if I have these benefits and all of a sudden I have a job opportunity, is that going to put my benefit at risk? And when I say benefit, it might be dental or health risk or drug benefits, those sorts of things, all of a sudden become at risk. And they're forced to make those decisions.
Yeah, the system is not built on trust at all. It's built on tightly controlling people's behavior. And that really goes against a life of dignity. I mean, imagine if somebody was really dictating your day-to-day choices and opportunities. Nobody wants that. Nobody thrives in that kind of an environment. So I think our income support system, specifically social assistance, it's designed to be an option of last resort. So in order to qualify, you really have to have next to no savings, no assets. You are already, living in poverty. And there are a lot of barriers to actually moving out of poverty once you are in that system, because as you said, something like Ontario Works, our welfare system, is designed to funnel people into employment. But employment is not all created equal, right? So if you are, being encouraged to go into a very low income, precarious job, and as a result, you're going to lose health and dental benefits that come with your social assistance, plus not have any stability in those hours, not know if, you're going to have that job a week from now, 2 weeks from now. That's a really difficult choice for folks. You're pitting sort of a system expectation of what people should be doing against what might be in the best interest of that specific individual as defined by them. And so I think that our systems are designed in such a way that really doesn't give people the flexibility to make decisions that work for them, that will ultimately help them achieve what they want to achieve in their own lives.
Jasmine, it's I have come across this phrase now as I've learned more about it and talked to folks like Talia and Neil McCarthy at the food bank, and they've told me that's what they call the welfare wall.
Yes, exactly. The welfare wall refers to this phenomenon where we're failing to adequately support people on welfare, and then we're failing to actually incentivize people to work, because when you're climbing out of poverty, your tax rate is actually higher than any other income group. So the tax rate for folks, I think between $25,000 to $35,000 is 41.3%, which is actually the highest of any income level. And then we're seeing folks who were qualifying for all these additional non-cash benefits. So it could be dental, medical insurance, other benefits that are super helpful, all of a sudden lose that as soon as they join the working poor. So especially in a city or in major urban areas in Canada where the cost of living is so high and a person on minimum wage needs to work multiple jobs just to make ends meet. It's a system that doesn't really work. It fails to adequately address poverty, and it actually fails as a social protection policy.
But I guess the other side of that then, Gareema, is we're incentivizing welfare. If you want to pick up on that point, we've made it easier, and I use that in your air quotes again, we've made it easier or more attractive or more just easier to navigate if I can stay on the benefits or not take that job.
Yeah, I think we need to back up a bit and talk about why we talk about the welfare wall. And in that, policymakers and economists will often talk about marginal effective tax rates, right? So as your income goes up, it's a calculation of how much more you'll be paying in income taxes, as Jasmine was referring to, and quantifies how much you'll lose in benefits. And so when we talk about the welfare wall, what policymakers are doing are looking at huge spreadsheets and tinkering again, with the parameters of social assistance or different benefits and credits, without asking, why is work today not providing the type of security that it once did, right? For people with moderate incomes and low incomes, work is precarious. Incomes are insecure. One week you might have a decent income. The next week you don't. You don't have retirement savings from work. You don't have health benefits coming in from work. If you don't have control around time and scheduling, how do you find childcare? And so I think the question is less about, you can reduce the welfare wall and reduce meters by cutting and slashing benefits. You would achieve the goal of reducing the welfare wall. But what you'll do at the same time is completely erode any sense of dignity that people might have. And instead, what we might want to focus on is stronger labor protections for people so that work is good and secure and provides that sense of dignity that it once did.
And can I pick up on that as well? I think, I agree with what you're saying, Gareema, and I think the other piece there is, like, if we do think that, let's say work offers the stability and the security and the income that people need to live a life of dignity, we also have to recognize that to get to that place, people need to enter the work market from a place of stability, right? So I think what the social assistance system that we have fails to do is provide that life stabilization. And there's a lot of talk at the province at the moment of, providing life stabilization supports to folks. And that basically means, recognizing not everybody is going to be immediately job ready who goes on to social assistance. Some folks might need mental health services or affordable housing supports or literacy supports. There's a lot of different kind of services people might need. But at the same time, I think that all of us here would agree that you simply cannot stabilize your life and, be in a place where you can successfully enter the workforce if you don't know where your next meal is coming from, if you don't know if you're going to be able to afford your rent. So I think that the connection between those two pieces is so important, that building that stable foundation where people have dignity to make good choices for themselves, to be able to afford their basic needs, will really help with that transition into more meaningful employment where people feel ready to kind of maintain that good work, provided that it exists.
I want to get back to putting this up against the plan now that we've kind of talked about some of the lived experiences and the granular challenges on the ground in terms of navigating the system. I do want to get to that, but before we go, just based on what the three of you have been talking about here, as you're talking, and we discussed this nature of precarious employment, Jasmine, in the last 18 months, there are a lot more people who found themselves in a place where they didn't probably think of their employment as precarious. They were not necessarily in the gig economy. And now, based on the way some industries and some sectors have evolved or devolved, as the case may be, we're in a place where there are some of those adult workers that Gareema has described, single adult workers who are capable of working, but all of a sudden are in a place where now they are going to be part of an economy that might be driven more by the gig economy, by, gig employment. I'm going to have to learn how to be my own contractor, or I'm going to have to take 6-month contracts at a time where, in the past, it might not have been contract work, but I worked in a retail sector that employed me as long as I wanted to be there. Maybe it's not there anymore. I think we're going to see a shift in the workforce that might, in fact, put more pressure on the system that is already pushed to capacity. Do you get a read on that?
Yes, I would agree with that analysis. I think there are downward pressures because in this late stage of capitalism, with these kinds of labor market disruptions and these seismic shifts that are happening, not just in our economy, but globally speaking, because there's a global phenomenon here. There's if I want to oversimplify it, see two paths forward. One is that we're going to increase labor market protections and standards and ensure that everyone has access to decent work and a dignified working conditions, so everyone. Or we're going to have further fragmentation and segmentation of the market, of the workforce, and greater inequities that are going to happen along the same kinds of lines of the fracture lines, right, that we are already really aware of. And so there's a lot of lobbying going on right now. There is the rise of what so many others have identified, app-based companies that are lobbying the province and the government for, frankly, a new classification of workers who are not protected at all by our current labor market standards. And then we have this segment of the population with precarious immigration status, or that our immigration system allows to come here to work for very low wages so that we can get our basic needs met. And so there's this, this mirroring of these kinds of forces. And it's concerning. I think that unless we have serious government interventions, the way that the labor market is going is not a good path, in the sense that a flexible workforce or a responsive workforce to meet all of these labor market shortages and the fact that we have an aging population, is it going to look more like the conditions of personal support workers? Or is it going to look more like the conditions of some folks in some more secure sectors, which you have mentioned are even now becoming more precariously employed in this hyper-competitive environment? And I think those are some serious social and economic issues that we have to grapple with as a society. And those, again, most marginalized, most on the periphery, on the most precariously employed, on fixed incomes, on welfare recipients will be impacted a lot more severely than others.
So it sounds to me, Gareema, that an already stressed system is going to be challenged just by a pressure on more capacity. There's going to be more need. I mean, I don't think we're going to turn the corner on COVID-19 and say, oh, look at how much better off we all are. Now we're going to solve the problems of the world. We're going to see the depth of the problem, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's something to interrogate in that, right? We keep hearing about build back better, but are we actually building back better, right? We're so eager to return to normal. People want restaurants to open. People want to be able to go get their nails done and their hair did. That's cool. But the circumstances surrounding work amongst people who provide services to us are not inevitable. I think we've developed this culture to think that the circumstances that Uber drivers face or that the circumstances that restaurant workers face is inevitable. And I think it's important for us to remember that behind every low price is a low wage. And collectively, we have to think about what do we owe each other? Because, yeah, you're right. The stresses on the system, on the income security system, whether it's the federal system, provincial system, or municipal supports, will only continue to grow unless we don't have the right mix of stronger labor regulations, housing regulations, and investments in public services and supports.
Okay, so the last time we met, we closed by going around the table just to see what you thought was the lesson learned and the things that we would sort of take away and what would be your priority to improve the plan. Talia, if we're looking down the path now, and based on the conversation we've just had over the course of a couple of episodes of the last three, what are you looking for that would say we're on a path to success, if not a measure of success?
all the poverty reduction plans, whether at the federal, municipal, provincial level, all of them have different measurements that we can be looking at, poverty rates and deep poverty rates, et cetera. But, for me, what would be a clear indicator for me that we are on the right path, I want to see food bank use go down. I want to see people be able to afford their most basic of necessities. We haven't seen in the city of Toronto food bank use decline for a very, very long time. It spiked in 2008. Or after the 2008 recession, it spiked and it has not declined since. And so I think, to me, I know that we'll be on the right path if we can actually start seeing that change in people's lives, that they can afford their most basic of necessities. That's like the lowest bar I can think of. I hope that we can go well above that in terms of quality of life. But that's something that I would love to see.
So, Jasmine, the food bank use is the canary in the mine. Have you got a thought on what's the light on the horizon for you?
I think it's a difficult question, and I was grappling with it as you posed it. I think our tax system in Canada does need an audit and an overhaul. I think there are smarter people than me at the CCPA and other places that have come up with some robust and concrete recommendations for how we could have a more progressive tax system. I think that has to be part of the solution. Is there political will? I'm not sure. But I also just think that with these means-tested programs, we're making people jump through many hoops for scraps. And in fact, a lot of people aren't even eligible off the bat because of their immigration status or whatever. So in my mind, having some kind of universal income security system that is easy to access and can be accessible by everyone who needs income support, that is people-centered, that values dignity and trust in a different way, I think that has to be part of the solution, because the truth is poverty is bad for individual health and people's well-being, but it's also bad for us as a society. There's a lot of untapped labor here that we're missing out on, and it's very costly to support people on this system too, and not to mention all the emergency service and all the other things that are related to poverty. So I think coming up with a system that's easy to implement, easy to access, that removes barriers for residents of all stripes, and have a tax system that supports people in a different way, I think that those would be ingredients of success for me.
Gareema, what do you think? I mean, to Jasmine's point, I mean, we talk a lot about the cost of, supporting the system. I think there was numbers I saw. It's almost $30 billion a year in Ontario alone. That is the cost of poverty. So if we can be successful and start to put that in some context or diminish that, I would think that that's a huge thing. But I don't know how you measure that. So from your perspective, is there something that you would look for and say that's a barometer of notion that we're on the path at least to success?
Yeah, I'd say a reduction in the number of people who face housing insecurity and core housing need. People can better afford housing, and that requires better housing regulation so that market housing can be more affordable, both from a rent and ownership perspective, but also huge investments in social housing. We really dropped the ball 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when the federal government decided to divest from housing. And now we've got a huge swath of the population whose retirement is contingent on their housing assets increasing. And you've got a huge contingent of people who are working paycheck to paycheck and also wondering how much their rent is going to be able to go up and whether they can afford it. So housing for me is that barometer for success.
In the next episode of the 2030 Project, we'll take a deeper look into the specific challenges those living with disabilities face when they struggle with poverty. Thanks for listening to the 2030 Project. We would encourage you to subscribe to the show. We're on Apple and Spotify, Google, Audible, pretty much anywhere you get your podcasts. We'd also be grateful if you'd offer a rating on the show. We'd love your thoughts, your feedback, even your criticism. The 2030 Project podcast series is sponsored by Daily Bread Food Bank, a Toronto-based charity whose mission is to collaborate with all to eliminate food insecurity and advocate for solutions to end poverty. I'm Dave Trafford, and the 2030 Project is an Eye Contact production.